Hello and welcome, it's time for another bonus. This week, for the gameplay, I have some Wolfenstein The Old Blood, the expansion that came out on Tuesday. Basically more Wolfenstein, which is a good thing. I actually replayed The New Order quite recently, just ahead of the expansion coming out, and I actually quite enjoyed it the second time through. It has a certain layer of polish, and it is surprisingly good for what could have been a very ordinary FPS. Anyway, it's all good prep work because I think Wolfenstein 3D is going to be the very first episode of a revived Retro Ahoy, which is coming up after my current project. And about that current project, well, that's what I'm working on now. It's actually quite an ambitious one. It's looking like it's going to be a 5-parter, and it is looking like it's going to be over an hour in length in total, which is... that's pretty substantial. That's a lot of writing and a lot of editing and a lot of graphics and a lot of everything. So, there's a mountain of work ahead of me and progress is going to be relatively slow. But I have written, I think, I haven't quite reviewed everything, but I've written 2 out of 5 of the parts. And I'll be moving on to part 3 quite soon. So, achingly slow progress, but it is what I'm working on and, we'll get there eventually. That's the important thing. I don't want to go into too much detail about what it is, I don't want to spoil the surprise, but I have hinted at the sort of topics that it might be about. It's about the Cold War, it's about video games, and it's a narrative documentary that kind of weaves between the different stories. So it's like a political background for some of the formative stories behind video games. Does that sound dull? It is pretty dull, but it should also be quite interesting. Anyway, let's get on to the questions. Is this better? YouTube says, "Hey Stu, glad this is back. Just wondering if you're watching Game of Thrones, and if so, at what point are you up to?" I have watched about half of the first season. I find it very hard to get invested in fiction, particularly serialized fiction. I like fictional films because, they have a start, a middle, and an end, and everything's structured nicely, but generally, I'm just more of a non-fiction sort of guy. Zach Welsh says, "Ahoy Stuart. What's your favourite film?" A tough question. I don't think I've got a single favourite film, at least not one that I can think of. I have been trying to expand my knowledge of films, so I've been watching some classics over the last couple of years, just to sort of fill in my blanks for cultural references, stuff like that. And I've become quite interested in filmmaking and stuff like that. I actually quite like it. And I've been transferring some of the techniques into my own work, certainly as far as structure and writing is concerned. So let's have a look at my recently rented Blu-ray discs. What have I enjoyed recently? I quite liked Léon, The Professional, I think it was called in America, the Luc Besson film, with, what's his name, Jean Reno, and Natalie Portman when she was 13, I think, or 14, or something like that. I did quite enjoy that one. It was a good action film, but it also had sort of a character and a sort of French curiosity about it, which I really liked. I quite enjoyed a German film from 2006 called The Lives of Others. It's about, I think it's set in 1983, and it's about state security, the Stasi, and their surveillance of suspected dissidents or, other undesirable types. And it's kind of nice. It's like, it's obviously, it's set in a political drama sort of setting, but it's also an exploration of the nature of observation on human behaviour and stuff like that, and I thought that was quite interesting. What else recently? No Country for Old Men. Good film. I think most people will have heard of that. Slightly more obscure, a Polish film called Ashes and Diamonds, about the rise of Soviet influence in the post-war power vacuum, and it's a bit of a tragedy, really. Those are some of the highlights that I've watched in the last year or two, but as far as long-time favourites, if I think back to my DVD collection, I remember liking The Fifth Element, and I still do like The Fifth Element. Very good film. Very enjoyable film. By Luc Besson, again. Similarly, sci-fi, and of a similar era, Gattaca, Existenz. Existenz isn't that good, but I still enjoyed it. And I quite enjoyed the tragedy of Kate Winslet's first film, Heavenly Creatures. I think it was her first film. It was an early film, anyway. MI2 Lethal says, "Hi Stu, what are your thoughts on the whole Jeremy Clarkson drama and Top Gear? Are you a Top Gear fan?" I do like Top Gear, yes. I don't own any sort of the paraphernalia. I don't have a t-shirt that says I am the Stig or anything like that. But I do enjoy watching it, and I found myself tuning in for the new episodes. But I think anybody who's followed Top Gear for the last, 15 years or something, it was pretty obvious that things were starting to spin down. It was still enjoyable to watch, and there was still the occasional, charming moment, but there seemed to be a slightly different energy, a slightly more world-weary approach to the challenges and stuff like that. So you could kind of tell it was on the downward face of the slope, so to speak. So it was obvious it was going to end at some point. It's just a shame it had to end right in the middle of a season. I would have quite liked to have seen the last few episodes. But so it goes, and it's a chance for Clarkson, Hammond and May to reformulate something else, and it's a chance for the BBC to attempt to rekindle the Top Gear name with new presenters and fail completely. Because, it's a personality show through and through, and without the personalities, it's not Top Gear. They can call it Top Gear, but it's something else. To clarify, I'm not going to condone punching somebody in the face. So in the letter of employment law, yeah, firing Clarkson, probably the right thing to do. But when there's a multi-million-pound franchise riding on it, sometimes the right thing to do isn't the right thing to do. Spectrosaurus Rex says, "What happened to Crush Dev Diaries, Stu?" I took a break for Iconic Arms, and I never resumed, but I will resume at some point. I have been thinking about doing it soon, it's just I'm kind of busy with Nuclear Fruit. But it will return, because I do want to finish this blasted game. Paradise Decay says, "You could do a fun fantasy firearms series, featuring guns like the hand cannon, aka Foam Finger from Dead Space, or Mr. Toots' unicorn gun from Red Faction Armageddon. A series, maybe not, but a one-off special on novelty weapons, perhaps. I shall make a note on my whiteboard, although there is quite a lot of stuff on there already. Of all the things I need to make a video, ideas are the one thing that I have in surplus." R3V4N21 says, "Any chance for a brief history of German video games?" It's a possibility. One of the specials I have planned is a brief history of French games. I'm reasonably familiar with quite a few French companies, French games, and they've been around, they've been producing games for a while. You can go back to like the 90s with Delphine Software, Infogrames, and then the birth of Ubisoft. So there's a substantial enough amount of games to cover, and I think it will be quite interesting, because the French have a certain style, which I like. Anyway, if that video turns out to be a success, then there is the potential for other nations. But this is in the future. This is beyond my ability to predict. Ready or Not asks, "Have you ever considered taking viewer requests for gameplay in the background of your bonus videos? Do you like audiobooks? And finally, what are those words that you end up continually mispronouncing or misspelling?" Viewer requests for bonus gameplay. I don't regard the gameplay in the background as anything being, it's not particularly important. I record whatever it is that I'm playing at the time. And I bought this yesterday and I played it, so I thought, all right, fine, I'll record the first 30 minutes. I've also been playing Dirt Rally, and that was a pretty strong contender. In fact, that might turn up at some point in the near future. But as far as viewer requests are concerned, if you want to suggest a game that I own, then maybe. But, yeah, it's not that important, surely. Next question. Do you like audiobooks? I don't dislike audiobooks. Do I listen to them often? Not really. Words I mispronounce. There are some. I messed up. I messed up chitin in the Half-Life Retro. I said chitin. I just read it. My ape-like brain just read the word, and I uttered chitin like some gibbering. That's another one. Oh, and in my head, I read the word fiery as fury, because the I's before the E, so it kind of messes up my brain, that one. So, yeah, there are a few words that I struggle with, but once you mess up a word once in a video, people do tend to correct you, and then from that point on, you've learned it. Nothing like a little bit of humiliation to drive a lesson home. As far as misspelling is concerned, yeah, there are longer words which I might have to look up, of course. I can't think of any more trivial ones that I might struggle with. I remember back in my high school days, I struggled with the word rhythm. It always took me 2 tries to spell it, because, there's no vowels in there. So it's like R-H-Y-T-H-M. THYTHM, something like that. Gavin Denea says, do you watch Russell Brand's The Trues on YouTube? Do you agree with boycotting the election? I do not. I'm not the biggest fan of Russell Brand. I mean, I don't mind his continued existence. I'm willing to tolerate that, but I'm not going to seek him out. I do find it quite amusing, because, he has all of this, kind of foppish style going on, and he behaves like an idiot. But people would say, oh no, he's actually really clever. He just behaves in an unusual way. And then, well, he starts talking about politics, and then everyone's like, oh, well, yeah, he is an idiot. Yeah. As I understand it now, Russell Brand is supporting Labour, so I guess he's not taking his own boycott too seriously. Mike Dempsey says, do you own an Oculus Rift? I don't, but when it hits retail, if it's at a reasonable price point, I can see myself being tempted. I'm still not entirely convinced that virtual reality isn't a gimmick. I know anyone who's ever tried Oculus Rift has said, oh, it's amazing, it's the next big thing. But there's a difference, between being cool tech and being a viable product. So we'll see, I suppose. Super So One Dear says, Stu, I'm grieving the loss of an April Fool's episode this year. What happened? I didn't have a good idea for an April Fool's video, is what happened. And I didn't really want to force something which would be, funny for the sake of being funny. All that, coupled with the fact that I was already pretty busy with Iconic Arms, just made me think, well, alright, fine, I'll just skip it this year. Don't get me wrong though, if I ever have a decent idea for a funny video, I might be tempted to do it. Although it does seem like a bit of a shame to waste a production slot on something less than serious. Krugus Punk says, can you speak in accents? Can you let us hear you speak in English with an American, Australian, German, Spanish, or Swedish accent? I wouldn't say I was particularly good at accents. One of my favourite accents is the South African one. I will try and do it for you here now, but I would like to, before I do that, I would like to apologise from anyone who might be from, or know anyone at all from South Africa, because I just want you to know, I'm sorry. Do you know what they call traffic lights in South Africa? Robots. That's not my final accent, that's just a prototype. What is up, Mom? Says, Belgium. Ever been? Looks like a lovely place to drown yourself in beer and chocolate. I have been, yes. I went to Brussels a couple of years ago. Had a nice time, drank a lot of beer. Discovered a wonderful bar called Murder Lambic. I could happily spend many an hour there. I had one of those sandwich things, what are they called? The mitraillette. Which is like a Belgian kebab, except it's like frites or chips to us English fellows, with meat. I think I had frikandel with sauce on a baguette type thing, and it's indulgent, it's delicious, and it was good. And apparently they fry the chips in horse fat, which my vegetarian wife did not care for. But I like Belgium. I can definitely see myself going again, and I could probably live there if it wasn't for the fact that everybody spoke French. I might have to visit the Flemish part, although my Flemish is worse than my French. Luke Townsend says, hi Stu, fellow Manchester dweller here. Do you have a favourite bar or pub that you would recommend? I feel the need to broaden my horizons now that I'm exiting the student life. If I am drinking in Manchester, there are two places that I would look to. My favourite place is Brewdog in the centre, just because they've got a great selection of beers, and it's a nice environment. It's like post-industrialist, bare brick walls and metal beams, but I like it, it's nice, and they've got a pinball machine there, although I think it's broken. Another place that I like is the Port Street Beer House. It's on the other side of town in the northern quarter, and it's a little bit more traditional, but it's still got the same great selection of beers. A bit more cramped, I think, than Brewdog. I do prefer Brewdog space, but the selection of beers is equally good. And another place that I'd like to go, but I haven't yet been, is, I think there's a couple of them actually in Manchester, but the Marble Brewery have a couple of pubs, and I'd like to go and sample their stuff, but I haven't yet been. But, I mean, Manchester is it's not a city wanting for choice, there is plenty on offer. Shaun Mrak says, have you thought about doing a brief history of video game music? Or sounds in general? You've covered graphics, why not the audio aspect too? I have been thinking about this a bit more recently. I initially wrote off the idea of doing a brief history of music because it's it's much, much harder to demonstrate music without stopping the voiceover and saying, listen to this. But I don't know, if I approach it from a more technical angle, like the actual hardware producing the sound and the capabilities of the hardware, I think that might be, well, it sounds a bit more technical and a bit more dry, but I think it would be interesting from the storytelling sense, because then you've got the evolution of the hardware, and then you can still have the demonstration of the sounds that these hardware things can produce. But there's a sense of development. So I don't know if I'd do it strictly in a chronological fashion. I might split it into different sections, like sampled sound effects, chip tunes, MIDI. Oh, MIDI. But I don't know. I think there is a possibility for this, but I think the idea has to simmer for a little while yet. White Gangster 400 says, ever been contacted by a big entertainment company to do narration for them? Yes, there have been some offers. Ever since I stopped doing Call of Duty weapon guides, and I started doing more interesting content. Well, more interesting is subjective, but for me, more interesting. There has been an uptick in interest from external sources, and I'd wager some of you might have heard of some of the people in contact with me. It's offers to create content for sites that you might have heard of, or even larger corporations. So yeah, as I raise my public profile, then there are going to be more and more offers for me, and it has kind of got me thinking. I can see a fork in the road ahead, and there are two distinct choices as far as evolving my content is concerned. On the one hand, there's professional work, going pro. And on the other hand, there's staying independent, but maybe looking to a source like crowdfunding, like Patreon. So it's a dichotomy, and I have to be honest, while the idea of going pro and getting paid generously for doing so is quite appealing, I would lament the loss of freedom, and I would hate to see my content behind a paywall. It's my ambition to keep my major production on YouTube, or at least freely accessible on some video platform. I'm not attached to YouTube in particular, but I'd like my main work to be available free and open, maybe ad supported, but not in a position where you have to pay a subscription fee. And if I went pro, then there would be a risk, that the content would be only available through select sources. You might have to pay for it, and whilst the compensation might be compelling, I'm not so sure I'd be happy. But don't worry, I'm speaking not of things that are going to happen, but only of my worries for things that could happen. If I do change anything, it will be a well-considered move. And of the two choices I presented, I do prefer the idea of crowdfunding, because it does let me retain control of my content. So that might be an avenue I go down. I haven't rushed into it because I'm a little bit reticent to sort of go into the digital panhandling business. It's not really something that I want to do. But I get asked the question, Stu, where's your Patreon? Quite a lot. And I'm thinking, well, it comes to a certain point and you are throwing money away. Anyway, this is all thought for the future. Really what I want to do is just produce content. That's kind of my ambition, really. It's a humble ambition, but it's one that gives me satisfaction. Ethan Harmon says, hey Stu, what are your thoughts on the announcement of their new Deus Ex game? I'm actually quite excited for it. Human Revolution, I think that was a real grower on me. I played it through once, and it was okay. It was alright, yeah, it was fine. But the second time I played through it, I realised, it was actually pretty good. It had more depth than I realised the first time through. I think it's rare that a game these days has so much in the way of replayability. So that's really one of the key things to like about Deus Ex, is the multiple approaches you're offered in terms of solving problems. Oh, and the interior design was fantastic. Well, everything about it was a bit yellow. It was a bit of a yellow game, was Human Revolution, but it was beautiful. Anyway, I shall wind it down here. We're almost at 20 minutes, and I have some work to do tonight. I have a portion of the Nuclear Fruit script to record. The prospect of doing all 5 parts in one go doesn't appeal, so I'm gonna make a start on the first part, the prelude, really, and then I can start editing. I can start putting together graphics and music and all that sort of good stuff. It should be good. It might not be, but it should be good. I'll do you another bonus in a week or so. and hopefully by then I'll have some tangible progress for you. I'm hoping to have at least written part 3, ideally part 3 and part 4, and if not part 4, well, I better be far ahead and editing part 1. The good news is that when this comes out, you're probably going to have something which is feature length, released within the space of a week. So all of this delay shouldn't be for nothing, hopefully. Anyway, I best get busy. Until next time, farewell.